Good morning, Happy Valley, and welcome back to another edition of Penn State 365 podcast. As always, I'm your host, Richie O'Leary, and join when we're talking Penn State football recruiting. My co-host, HappyValleyInsider.com senior writer, Dylan Callahan-Crawley. Dylan, it's been a long couple days for Penn State football fans, if they follow recruiting at least, I should say. First, Lex Cyrus ends up choosing South Carolina over Penn State, and then just minutes ago, or whenever you're listening to this, could be hours ago, days ago, Taz Williams has decided to commit to Baylor over Penn State. Let's just start with that one, just because it's so recent. How big of a sting is that for Penn State?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those that, on the surface level, definitely a big sting for Penn State. But then you compound it with the loss of a Matthew Alden a couple weeks ago, and then Lex Cyrus earlier this week, who I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. It's a huge loss for Penn State. They've now missed out on 3 of their top wide receiver targets in the class. They do have 2 really nice wide receivers committed, 2 guys who I think could develop into 4-star prospects here on Rivals in Lyric Samuel and Jeff Exiner. I'm very high on Samuel, especially 6'4", great athlete. I think his 40-yard dash is in the 4.5s. So a lot of potential there with those 2, but you need more than 2 wide receivers in a class, and you missed now on 3 of your other top targets in this cycle. It's a major loss for Penn State. It's a major loss for Marques Hagans, and it leaves them in a really tough spot going forward because, there's Kobe Howard out there who visited last month, and he's at this point seemingly the only guy that you could really point to and say that Penn State, has a solid shot of landing here in the upcoming weeks. There's a couple other guys who are out there that could happen if they were to make a push and some things go right. But overall, this is a really tough spot for Penn State football and Marques Hagans to be in on the recruiting trail at a position of need, especially arguably the biggest position of need coming into this cycle.
Yeah, before you go any further and before we go back to the negative news of this week, I should say, not just today, but Lyric Samuel, I've gotten to see him a couple times in person. Last year, this offseason, just a month ago, I saw him at a 7-on-7 camp, or 2 7-on-7 camps. He's a stud. He's a certified stud. I think he's severely underrated. I think that kid should be a 4-star easily, and I think he'll get there before the rankings are finished for this class. But I need to say, even if they did get Taz Williams, even if they did get Lex Cyrus, that kid's better than both of them, in my opinion. But besides the point,
I think Lyric Samuel has an argument to be a 250 kid and even higher. I think the potential is phenomenal, and I think he is arguably the best wide receiver that Marques Hagans has recruited during his short tenure in Happy Valley, and one of the best wide receivers Penn State's recruited in a long time.
Yeah, so now we keep talking about Marques Hagans. He's had a lot of struggles on the recruiting trail.
Yeah.
Now, I know they have 2 receivers committed, but Jeff Exiner's recruitment wasn't really Marques Hagans. It was more Kenny Sanders, who has a relationship with him. I think they're actually related in some way, if I recall correctly. But besides the point, other than that, like 2 cycles in a row, now you have Lyric Samuel, I'll give you, good get. Peter Gonzalez, in-state kid, local kid, probably very easy get. Josiah Brown, New York kid, solid get, speedster. And then Tyseer Denmark had some academic issues, but figured it out. Now he's on campus. Yeah. So, I mean, really, what has Marques Hagans done on the recruiting trail? I don't want to hate on the guy too much, but he hasn't really done anything.
Yeah, it's been a very tough start for Hagans on the recruiting trail. Now, I think you can say all 3 wide receivers last year are really solid wide receivers, have a lot of potential. But, yeah, those were recruitments that, quite frankly, Marques Hagans should have won. Should have won easily.
That's my point.
Tyseer Denmark originally committed to Oregon in his recruitment. Penn State flipped him. He decommitted, flipped back to Penn State eventually. But those are all recruitments Penn State should win. Penn State should have won the Jeff Exiner recruitment. Yep. And Lyric Samuel was valued by coaching staffs, under recruited, underrated across the industry, and that, as a result, made that recruitment a little bit easier for Penn State. But another one that Penn State, I think, should win 9 times out of 10. When it comes to these tougher recruiting battles, it's been, really tough sledding for Hagans. Now you can look at Alden. That one, I think, is location, when it comes to Virginia Tech, but also relationships. Taz Williams, from what we're hearing, it sounds like NIL based, a decision here, which shouldn't be surprising in 2024. It is what it is. I'm not sure Hagans could have really done much more in the Taz Williams recruitment, but unfortunately for him and his shoes, coming off a really underwhelming first year on the field for the wide receivers under his leadership, and then losing out on Alden and Cyrus in the last few weeks. Unfortunately for Hagans, it's just one of those losses with Williams that it's compounded, and yeah, it may not be his fault directly that Penn State didn't win this one. If NIL was that big of a focus in this recruitment, but at the end of the day, he's the wide receiver coach. As a good colleague of ours said a couple days ago to me, there's always more you can do as a coach when it comes to recruiting. There's always more that you could have done. So unfortunately for Marques Hagans, whether it's fair or not, this is going to be another one that goes in his L column for now. At least we'll see if Penn State continues to pursue him. Now that being said, if Taz Williams would have committed to Penn State, I do think it would have been a tough recruitment to hold on to. I think it would have been very similar to a Alvin Henderson type recruitment, even though he does have ties to Pennsylvania. There was a lot pulling for him to stay in the South, especially, of course, when it comes to NIL. Baylor, with this late push, proved that. So it's been a disastrous few days for Marques Hagans, I think, on the recruiting trail, to say the least. And unfortunately for Penn State, like we said, there's not really any immediate answers outside of Kobe Howard. And while I think they stand in a good spot for Kobe Howard going forward, it's not a slam dunk by any means either that he winds up in this class.
So Kobe Howard's visiting at the end of the month, Last Bash weekend, I believe. He'll be on campus. Who else are they kind of looking at? I know I've mentioned on the Lions Den forum, Zamir Smith. There's a guy out of Maryland, former Alabama commit, leaning Maryland very heavily. Keanu Johnson, I know they hosted him for a camp back on June 2nd. Would that be a name that they would revisit? I know he's technically a Duke lean, but I mean, he could easily win. You should be able to easily win that one, I think.
Right. No, and that's the thing about where Penn State sits right now in the wide receiver board is you look at going back to last month, June, with the official visits. There's only, I believe, after today, two or three guys that remain uncommitted. Philip Bell out in California, he seems likely to end up maybe at a USC or Ohio State. Washington is also in that one. Nashawn Montgomery appears likely to stay home and go to Florida. And then, it was the last one was Kobe Howard. So, I mean, it's back to the drawing board. Keanu Johnson could be one. Smith, like you mentioned, could be one. But I think if you're Penn State, you really do have to go back to the square one and just kind of reevaluate who is still out there, both regionally and out of region. If there's any guy you think it would not be a big reach, I think you would have to evaluate obviously what's left out there and go from there. But on the surface, there is no easy answers for Penn State on the recruiting trail right now when it comes to wide receivers. There are obviously quite a bit uncommitted, but for a lot of your 4-star, 3-star guys, they're deep in their recruitment now. They have their finalists. They're ready to make a decision in the upcoming weeks or months. It's hard to get into those recruitments. So at this point, you may have to look for a late riser in the 2025 wide receiver ranks, or just hope that you can make a strong enough push on one of these guys and either end up flipping them or end up making a strong enough push to get into a finalist group and potentially land them. But outside of Kobe Howard and perhaps Smith, there's no immediate answers for Penn State in the near future, and I think only Howard really is one of those. Is really the only one who is potentially an immediate answer, since it sounds like he may decide here before the beginning of his upcoming season. But even then, like I said a little bit ago, Kobe Howard, while I think they're in a good spot, absolutely not a lock to be a Nittany line either. If they make a strong push for him.
it's so tough. Like, I mean, you want to try to flip someone, I guess, but most of these recruitments, I know some people are blaming NIL on just about any single recruitment. You lose a recruitment, It's like NIL, NIL, NIL. Now, that's not the case for all of these.
No. From what I've gathered, the NIL when it came to Lex Cyrus was pretty close. I don't think NIL played a major factor in that one. I think that one came down to who Cyrus probably felt was going to have where he was going to have a better chance of either developing or being, used as a potential top wide receiver. And he thought that South Carolina was a better fit. But based off what I've been told, the NIL between Penn State and South Carolina was pretty close. And if anything, was probably one of the smaller factors in that recruitment. He was going to get a nice NIL deal no matter where he went there. Matthew Allen, like we said, was I think more of a location and relationships style recruitment relationships and location based recruitment as well. Like Cyrus, there's also a lot of talk the last few days that he was a kid who just kind of wanted to get out of Pennsylvania, go experience somewhere else, and South Carolina gave him that opportunity to do that.
Yeah, it's just been a kick in the nuts lately. It seems like for Penn State fans. Other than receiver, do we really want to touch on the other positions? I know they're kind of they're done at defensive tackle because they got Adarica earlier this week. If you haven't listened to that podcast, we kind of broke down his game. Tuesday, Monday, I forget.
Yeah, and I will say it's funny, despite all the bad news here over the last couple of weeks for Penn State. Penn State's still putting together a really damn good recruiting class here in 2025. Top 10 currently, 22 commitments, 12 four-star commitments. This is still a very good recruiting class, but it definitely could have been much better over the last few weeks for Penn State. And I still think there's a chance that they land some of these guys they missed. I think they will continue to push for Brandon Finney, and I think they'll continue to push for Lex Cyrus. Will they flip either? I'm not sure, but they're not. Those recruitments are not over, in my opinion. But despite all the bad news, this is still a really good spot. And Randy Adarica was the latest guy to commit.
Yeah, I think that's 5 or 6 Rivals 150 kids now. 7. Sorry, Darius Dixon, Jabri Coleman, Randy Adarica, Jameer Joseph, Alex Tatch, Jaden Woods, and Max Granville. So, heck of a little bit of a haul there. But like you said, it just sucks because it feels like that they're just missing on so many guys that this class could go from very good to pretty good to great.
Yeah, this had a chance to be an elite class. It's going to end up being probably a very good borderline great class, but yeah, it could have been an elite class, a class that you could build a strong foundation around that could help you get to that next level, especially with the expanded college football playoffs. I still think this is a class that can help Penn State I think the expectation going forward now is Penn State is going to be a college football playoff team on maybe not a yearly basis, but I think Penn State should be in the college football playoffs at least every other year, if not 3 out of 4 years. At least. Right. Yeah. So I think this is a class that's going to continue to put Penn State where they have been. But yeah, it could have been a class, and it could still be a class that gets Penn State to that next level. But it just, some recruitments haven't broken their way recently, and some of that I think is Penn State. I think some of that is on the coaching staff and recruiting, and some of that is obviously on NIL. I know a lot of people like to say NIL this, NIL that when it comes to all these recruitments, but not all these losses have been NIL. A couple of them have been NIL, but not all of them. And I think those that are not NIL that they have lost, they're going to have an opportunity to redeem themselves going forward because those recruitments are not over necessarily. But the ones that were NIL based, obviously, are going to be a little bit tougher to come back and win right now.
I mean, listen, end of the day, you guys want your program to be good. You want it to be great. You want it to take that next step. You have to donate. That's just how it works. Whether you want to or not, that is the way of college football nowadays. If you want your program to win, you have to throw money towards it. And in order to get these players, you need money. We're talking about SEC programs throwing around 250, 300, even 400 a year for some guys. We see the quarterback deals that they're getting. These quarterbacks, Nico whatever his name is, out of Tennessee, the former 2024, 2023 commit, got like what, 15 million promised to him, 16 million from Tennessee. Yeah. This is just the way of the world. Like Zollers is getting seven figures from Missouri to go there. Like you need to pay, you need to up the ante, and you need to donate to whether it be Happy Valley United, whether it be straight to the programs themselves. Revenue sharing is great and all, but I'll tell you at the end of the day, I don't think it makes as much of a difference as people think it's going to.
I don't think it's going to make a huge difference. I think it's going to even the playing field a little bit, but yeah, Penn State is still going to need just. They're gonna need people who have some deeper pockets to start contributing more to the program. They have a good base of big NIL donators, but they need more. They need more. But like you said, Penn State is also, I think, James Franklin is one of the few coaches, I think it's his game, who does recruit in a very honorable way. He plays recruiting quite fairly in today's age, and transparently. But unfortunately for James Franklin at Penn State, that's not how most of the country's operating right now. And I said it on the board. I'll say it here. I don't think it's anything that's really a secret. I know there are programs out there in the SEC especially who are offering kids sign-in bonuses basically when they commit to schools. They are paying kids immediately when they start committing to a program, when they commit to a program. I'm not saying that South Carolina does this. I'm not saying Baylor does this. I know Baylor's not SEC. But this has come up in previous conversations with Penn State targets. But there are kids who are being paid as soon as they commit to school. They get sign-in bonus when they commit or when they sign with the program. And there are kids out there where top targets at certain programs are getting $250,000 plus a year starting their freshman season. And Penn State is in a good spot. Penn State, relatively compared to the rest of the country, is in a very good spot, I think, NIL-wise, relatively speaking. But compared to the top tier of college football programs, there's still a massive gap that, maybe not a massive gap, but there's still a big enough gap that it's going to be tough for Penn State to overcome when it comes to these recruitments that are NIL-based. And for Penn State going forward, they're just going to have to continue to recruit those kids where NIL is not as big of a factor. And there are those kids out there. And there are highly rated kids out there who don't have NIL as a big factor. But for those who do, it's going to be tough for Penn State to win those recruitments for the foreseeable future. Now, that could always change if some big donations come in, but until then, it's going to be tough to win recruitments like the Taz Williams recruitment in the NIL era. Because you could be leading for a kid up until the 12th hour, 11th hour, but at the 11th hour, another program comes in and swoops in and wins that recruitment. I mean, this is very similar recruitment to Brandon Finney that we saw a few weeks ago. Penn State leads until really the final moments, and then it just evaporates like that. Brandon Finney, I mean, we started hearing things about Finney coming to Oregon that day at like 3 p.m. And up until that day at 3 p.m., it seemed like Penn State. For Taz Williams, Penn State appeared to be in the lead last time we checked, Friday late afternoon. But sometime between Friday late afternoon and Friday, let's see when I posted the Taz Williams update on our board on Friday night.
I checked in Friday morning, and Friday morning it was all Penn State. It was like 11 a.m. I posted. I'm like, everyone's staying Penn State. Penn State,
I posted on the boards I posted on the boards on Friday night or on Saturday morning at 1:06 a.m. We learned about maybe an hour before then. Checked with a couple of sources to kind of confirm, but yeah, I mean, so in a 12-hour window, Penn State went from seeming like they were locked to land Taz Williams to not being a lock, and Baylor being in the front. And at the end of the day, I checked in with a source, and they think this was NIL based, and I don't think that's a surprise to anybody right now. But that's just recruiting in 2024, and I said the same on our good friend Zach Saeko's podcast, Locked On Nittany locked on Penn State, locked on Nittany Lions. I should remember that by now. But I went on his podcast and I said, yeah, on Friday, Penn State, is in a good spot here. But in today's recruiting, it's not over until Penn meets paper in December. And this is exactly why. Penn State, between the time I recorded that and 12 hours later, went from being the sure leader to not being the selection for Taz Williams.
Yeah, and it is just crazy how everything's changing. And I'm glad you mentioned Brandon Finney, because Brandon Finney, Oregon, comes out, a week ago, that Phil Knight is funding their NIL, and he's on his deathbed, but he's 86, so it's like he wants to see an Oregon championship. He said, I'm willing to fund whatever it takes. I'll spend as much as it takes to get one. And you see Dave Aranda, speaking of Taz Williams, Baylor, his quote this past week at Big 12 Media Days was, they're like, hey, how are you guys recruiting so well? We're paying players. That's it. He just straight up said it. And I'm glad someone coming out and saying it, because that's what they're doing now. Like, they have a 4-star at wide receiver. They have a 5-star at wide receiver. They have a 5-star defensive end or 4-star defensive end.
Yeah,
it's crazy. It's just paying the players.
No, yeah, and going back to something I said, don't get me wrong. I think the way James Franklin recruits is very honorable, and it's probably, and I think it's the right way to recruit kids. If I was a parent of a kid, that's how I want my son to be recruited by a coach. But I almost feel sometimes a detriment to Penn State because there's very few programs out there who are playing the game the same way as Penn State. There are other programs, but very few programs out there are playing the way that Penn State plays, and it's unfortunately sometimes causes Penn State to miss these kids, but I don't think it's really going to change anything for Penn State. Penn State's going to stay the way they recruit. It's how James Franklin always has, but it's just unfortunate the way it is for Penn State.
I mean, what else are you supposed to do? I know some schools are like, not Penn State, obviously. They're doing Beaver Stadium renovations, and it's much needed there, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But a lot of schools are putting their facilities on pause completely. Like, they're pulling the funding that they were going to give to the facilities, and it's just switching to NIL completely because you need it. You need NIL to compete. I don't think any of these kids care anymore about what the fucking facilities look like. They're just like, whatever. Like, if I get a weight room, that's great.
And
I just
honestly,
care about the money.
And that's something I've noticed. For a long time, one of the questions we've asked recruits is, you saw the facilities, what were your thoughts on the facilities? I've gotten multiple kids over the last couple months tell me, the facilities were great, but, everybody has great facilities these days. It's really not that big of a factor. It's facility. It used to be an arms race with facilities. That's no longer the case. The new arms race is NIL, and it's soon to be assistant coaches. Now that analysts, now that analysts can coach during practices and games, analysts are about to be the next arms race in college football next to NIL.
Yeah, it's just incredible. But like I said before, NIL, you need to donate. You want your team to win, you need to donate. It's time to step up or fall apart, basically, as a college football program. Now, going back to the revenue sharing, I wanted to touch on this a little bit. Every school is going to get $22 million. Or, well, I shouldn't say every school is going to be allowed to use $22 million of revenue.
Yeah.
The only schools that are almost like guaranteed to use that full $22 million is every Big Ten team, 18 teams, every SEC team, 16 teams, and that's it. After that, it's a guessing game on who else is going to use that $22 million. Now, most of these programs in the Big 12, I'm assuming are going to use it. Some of the ACC programs like Clemson, Florida State, the higher-ups are going to use that full $22 million. On top of it, NIL is not going away. It's still a thing. No. Once they're out of $22 million for the year, they're just going to go over and be like, hey, you know what? That $22 million is coming right from the TV deal. We don't have to spend any of that. Now, who needs what? Because we're going to figure this out NIL-wise. So it's still going to be a factor. And then there's so many complications on top of it that they still haven't discussed and haven't, like, solidified. Number one, it sounds like roster limits are going to go to, like, 85 almost. And they're just going to eliminate the walk-on pretty much because teams are just going to keep paying walk-ons just to be a scholarship player. Which we've talked about this offseason specifically because of Penn State's scholarship limit. And number two, Title IX is playing a factor in this, whether people want to believe it or not. And that's where the big issue comes into play. If you're going to spend $10 million on football players, You need to find out are you going to have to spend $10 million on women's sports now? Like, are you going to have to put $10 million towards women's lacrosse, women's basketball, women's volleyball, whatever?
No,
it's going to be a mess.
The headaches are just starting, and I don't mean headaches in a bad way, but headaches in just that there's a lot that still has to be figured out about how all this is going to work. And but for now, it is a completely lawless society when it comes to college football and NIL, and college basketball and NIL too. It's completely lawless, and until it's the problem is Pandora is already out of the box, and I'm not sure there's a way to get it back in the box at this point. So I mean, I just don't know what happens from here. Quite frankly, I mean, it's gonna. I think it's honestly gonna take legislation at the national level for really anything to ever kind of be wrangled in, and I'm just not sure that's gonna happen anytime in the near future.
I've had people ask me in the past couple of days, like, why can't Penn State just promise this 22 mil? That's the reason, basically, because you don't have it guaranteed by any means. And also it's not 22 mil. It's 22 mil in total, but you got to figure out how it's going to split between who gets what and who gets this. It's not just football. Don't get me wrong. Football is probably going to dominate that revenue sharing, but there's other sports as well that are going to need some. It's just, and NIL's not going away. Like, it's not going anywhere. It's still going to be a thing. And like I said, there's I just named 18 plus 16 is 34?
Yeah.
So 34 programs are guaranteed to basically use that same amount you're using. On top of that, the Big 12 is going to get involved. I'm sure some ACC schools will get involved. Hell, there might be some G5 programs that are just going to say, fuck it, let's spend as much as we can. Look at SMU, who's just joined the ACC. They're willing to outspend anyone. Like, they don't care. So it is still a mess. I don't think revenue sharing helps as much as people think. And then on top of it, I've had someone also ask me last night, they're like, why can't they just like go to the NCAA and say, like, this isn't allowed? And it's just, that's not a thing. Like, that's because the NCAA is scared shitless. NCAA is scared that the Big Ten and SEC are just going to leave. They've already talked about a partnership together.
Right.
Like, they'll just dip real quick.
And the other thing is nobody is going to, for lack of better words, tattletale on anybody else, because everybody's 90% of the school, not 90, but you know what I'm saying. A large majority of these schools are playing the same game the same way, especially in the SEC and some Big Ten schools. If one tattles on the other, the whole thing comes crashing down. It's everybody knows what's going on. It's not a secret. But nothing's going to be done about it either. It's a strange place.
Here's the other thing. Miami got caught, right, with the Cavender twins.
Right.
What happened? Hey, don't do that again. Like, it didn't matter. No one gives a shit. Like,
no.
The NCAA was scared of everyone leaving, and that's their biggest issue. So they don't. You can go ahead and tell on me. I'll tell on you. You know what they're going to do? Absolutely nothing, because they don't give a shit.
Yeah, the NCAA is powerless at this point. It is a powerless organization that really has nothing anymore when it comes to college football and college, especially college football. Maybe other college athletics, because the NCAA tournament is
too.
But college football especially. I mean, I'm not sure how many people truly realize it, but the college football playoffs are not NCAA
sponsored or whatever.
It is not a. I guess it's. I don't know if sanction is the right word or not, but unlike the FCS playoffs, the FCS national champion is the NCAA champion. The college football playoff champion is not.
Is the All-State college football playoff champion or something?
It's not the NCAA champion, and technicalities, I guess, is the word.
But yeah, for me and Dylan, that's another episode of the Penn State 365 podcast. Signing off.